Today, like I mentioned before the music break, we'll be looking at lifelong learning. And my colleague Barry got the opportunity to speak to Taaka Awori. She is the CEO of Busara Africa. And she actually gave quite the great insights on lifelong learning. So let's listen and we'll break it down. And then don't forget you can join us with your comments also and your thoughts.
There's this element of education that has to do with lifelong learning. What is it all about?
And thank you for, I really commend you, one, for focusing on education, but taking it a step further to think about lifelong learning.
Right.
So let me describe it. I would describe it in simple terms as the decision we take as individuals to decide we will be continually learning throughout life.
Okay.
And this is different from deciding that learning ends when you're outside of a classroom. As you said, learning ends when I've gotten that degree. Learning ends maybe when I have finished with secondary school or primary school, and then that's it. But rather, lifelong learning is deciding that you will learn from everything in life. The courses you take, the experiences you have, the challenges you have, and it's continuous throughout your life.
Well, so we're here, lifelong learning. You've heard what she had to say. I have my co-hosts, my colleagues with me in the studio, Mamia, but well, you already spoke to her earlier. Hafiz and Barry have just joined us, and let me start with you, Hafiz.
Yes, thank you very much, Epi. Lifelong learning, I think she said it all. Yes, but just to add a little to what she said, I think personally, I think lifelong learning has to do with also asking yourself certain questions. Basically, have I learned enough to carry me through the uncertainties of life? Is it would my island of knowledge forever stay the size at this point in my life? Okay, these are questions you want to ask yourself as you try to embrace the concept of lifelong learning, and knowing that it goes beyond the four walls of a classroom. But then lifelong learning also opens our eyes to new perspectives. It also opens us to new ideas, and as a result, brings us new passions. Lifelong learning also helps us embrace that childlike curiosity that we once had, and dare I say, to some extent, also helps us to reinvent ourselves later in life.
Well, in that it does indeed. The one thing I think there's a difference between educating yourself and learning. And initially, at a point in time, we actually when we start, we learn to read. But as you move on, you start reading to learn. So learning is a process. From what I pick, is something that transcends beyond the classroom. Something that's going to carry you on through and through. Now, let me bring Barry in here.
Yeah, Epi, how are you?
I'm good.
Great. Yeah, I mean, speaking to Madam Taka, it was more of like revealing something that I've always believed in, which is more of like learn a thing a day outside. Of course, we're out of more of like tertiary, and now we're in the working field, the job markets, and all. So for me, I think it is something that aligns with my philosophy of learning stuff every day. And I always say this, like we encounter people on a daily basis. I mean, through interactions, unless you're not willing to pick something beneficial to yourself, you would come by something that you're like, okay, I think this is something that I've never come across before, and you'd want to know that thing and then practicalize on it if the opportunity provides itself. Yeah, so I think it's something very practical that we sometimes do without even realizing it, but it's something that's very, very vital to our development as humans. Yeah.
Yeah, so lifelong learning.
Mm-hmm.
I think in as much as it comes with taking a decision,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we learn things without necessarily knowing unconsciously.
Yeah.
In a sense that, let's say you go through an experience with one or two humans, somebody treats you some way, somebody else does the same thing to you, then unconsciously you tell yourself, if I should meet another person who shows these traits of the person who did this to me, I have to stay away from that person because it happened once, it happened twice, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's lifelong learning. It's a good thing because it's not everything that you can learn in a classroom.
We'll take the second part. And yes, we're still learning here on the Africa Daily Show.
Let's go beyond the concept of lifelong learning. Could you please elaborate this with some practical examples?
So, an example is some of the leaders I work with are people in their 50s, 60s. So, they've been around. Talk about me, 20 years experience. Some of them have 40 years experience. They're CEOs, top of their games, but still they feel they have something to learn about leadership. So they get an executive coach, such as myself, or they take a course. So that's an example of somebody or people who, even though they've been in the game a long time, still they feel they have something to learn.
Right.
Another example are people who are going through, and again, as a coach, I come across this, people who are going through a difficult time. And as you can imagine right now with COVID, everything that's happening,
True.
people are going through difficult times.
Absolutely.
Or people find that they've gone through situations where a relationship didn't work, or they get fired from a job. Now, the lifelong learners don't spend time complaining, saying, oh, you see that guy, that woman, she was so awful. Oh, you see that company, they were so bad. Rather, the lifelong learners say, what is this trying to teach me?
Right.
What can I learn from this experience? Yes, it's a tough experience. You wouldn't wish it on anybody, but you still flip it to say, what can I learn from this so I can get better and more resilient?
Hey guys, my name is Eva Nelson. Keep listening to Africa Global Radio.
Any of you want to add something to it?
I think basically what it was all about here, I think something that I really caught was example of people who engage in this, aspect of lifelong learning. She gave an example of people who are more of 50 years of age, 40, 50 years of age, still in the working space, have achieved so much, but then still give room to learn something. Okay, her being a coach, a specialist, and all of that, a life, learning coach specialist with over 20 years experience and everything, she finds some way to even teach people who have even vast experience in terms of qualifications. So these are some of the things, she actually gave in terms of examples of lifelong learning. Yeah.
Hafiz?
All right. To quickly add to what Barry has just said, I think essentially what she's saying is that, look, learning is a process. Learning takes time. Learning is hard work. And because of these three, in the process of learning, you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And now you shouldn't freak out when you make a mistake in the process of learning. Because at the end of the day, what mistakes teaches us is that it gives us a target that by constant practice we get to overcome. And so, if you take a classical example of Michael Jordan, we all know MJ when we talk about NBA. But what some people don't even realize is that he was cut from his high school team when he started out.
Yeah.
So, yes, she's talked about how, learning is something that it never stops. Barry mentioned age. Some would say it transcends age. Learning transcends age. Because to some extent, when you keep learning that, it keeps you young, basically, because you are perennially young. Looking at if indeed you are actually trying to, enrich your mind or engage in little exercises or take up certain hobbies later in life to keep fit, like ballet or anything like that. So, learning never stops, basically.
Yeah, I think it also gives you a different perspective mentally. It gives you different ways to actually look at things, especially as you age. Ms. Mort?
Yeah. Hafiz talked about learning transcending age and it being something more than this age, and I agree with that perfectly in a sense that we are in the technology age.
Yeah.
And our parents used to be in a time where they didn't have to use smartphones and they didn't have to use laptops and all of that. So now, in a bit to adapt to the way the world is moving right now, they have to learn new things.
Yeah.
And there's this funny tweet that people put out in there, like, the only time your parent will be silent is when you're teaching them how to use a phone.
That's true.
So I think sometimes in learning, in wanting to adapt to the way the world has changed or the way the world is turning, we open ourselves to learning new
New
things.
things. Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, let's go on and listen to what more she still had to say.
Now, why is this so crucial? Why do you think it's very important that individuals and organizations embrace this culture of lifelong learning?
Well, I think as you've seen, if anything that 2020 has taught us is that we're living in a world of constant change. And in fact, what's happened is change has been accelerated.
Absolutely.
So the reality is that life is changing so much, the world is changing so much that we have to stay up to the new changes to be relevant, to ensure that we're able to cope with this new world. So lifelong learning helps you to ensure you have the right skills, mindset, attitude to adapt and thrive in this new world. So
Right.
that's one reason why it's so important.
Okay.
And it's the same thing at the individual level as well as an organizational level.
Right.
So you can imagine if your company or your organization is not constantly learning how to get better at serving your customers. Imagine how last year,
Right.
many companies and organizations who may have been offering services face to face had to immediately learn how to do it virtually.
Very true.
That's an example of how you have to constantly learn and adapt and pivot.
Right.
Because the reality is, if you're not learning, stagnating.
Absolutely.
And finally, I would say we're all work in progress. None of us is perfect. So if you want to be happier, more successful, ultimately you have to keep learning.
Wonderful. So it means some of these organizations and individuals, per what you said, have actually indulged themselves in this lifelong learning path. But sometimes you may not realize it, maybe as an individual.
Totally, because it's a mindset.
Right.
I'll give you an example as Busara.
Okay.
As a firm, last year, indeed, a lot of our work, our training has been, maybe our coaching has been virtual, but a lot of our training has been face-to-face. So immediately last year, we had to think about how do we pivot? How do we shift to start to offer more virtual programming? But not only that,
Right.
we had to re-look at the content of what we were offering. Now we start to talk a lot more about resilient leadership,
Right.
how you lead remote teams. So that we have to change. And it's not as if we sat there and said, oh, we're a learning organization.
Yeah.
But it was part of our culture and our mindset to constantly say things have changed.
Right.
What are we learning from this? How do we need to adapt and
Okay.
pivot?
Right. Now, everything comes with its pros and cons. Let's also look at some challenges surrounding adopting a lifelong learning culture and practice.
Yeah, let's face it, it's not easy. Many of your listeners may be saying, yeah, Taaka, it's easier than... Right.
I know.
I'll tell you what I've seen people struggling with in terms of adopting this lifelong learning.
Right.
One is the mindset we have about learning. Most of us on this continent have been socialized to think about learning as something that's limited to formal education, which is why I'm so excited that you're having this part where we're talking about learning is not just what you learn in a classroom or in a course.
Nice.
The second challenge people face is even when they want to be lifelong learners, learning comes through reflection.
Okay.
But the truth is we're so busy doing. It's one thing after another. We're hustling, we're moving. So we don't have time to reflect and say, okay, things have changed. What do I need to do differently? This difficult thing happened. What is it saying about me and what I have to do? And that brings me to the final challenge is that a lot of learning isn't so much about skills and things you need to do externally.
Okay.
It's about changing who you are as a person.
Beautiful.
And we don't have the habit of doing what I call the inner work, because the biggest learning is not around knowledge. It's about learning about ourselves.
I love Africa Global Radio.
Well, the biggest knowledge is about learning about ourselves. Now, one thing I can say once through most of the points she made had to be about the mindset. Changing your mindset, because your mindset determines your outlook on life, for me. And she's made mention that your mindset determines how your approach to even learning or to see things as you learn by the day. If you don't have the right mindset, it becomes difficult for you to actually learn. Some people have limited their mindset that learning, like she mentioned, takes place only in the classroom. So when they're outside the classroom, if their interactions, their occasions or moments where they meet people and interact, or they find themselves in situations where they could actually pick up bits and learn from it, they don't do so because mentally they've actually psyched themselves that if I have to learn anything, then it has to be in the classroom. Once I'm outside the classroom, this doesn't apply. Hafiz.
Yes, she's clarified certain points as well, and she's gone on to talk about mental skill and all that, and I want to think that look, you might be brilliant in class, and but then it takes more than being clever to cut it in the real life out there, because if you don't sharpen other skills, you would definitely realize that you are alone out there, and that's a tough situation to put yourself in. But then she mentioned adapting, and for me, I like to look at it as exercising judgment, because once you're out there, it takes more than just the A's and the B's you scored in class to actually cut it.
Yeah.
And so, how do you exercise judgment in terms of the situations you find yourself? How do you exercise judgment in terms of the opportunities that come your way? How do you exercise judgment in terms of the choices you make? These are situations you are going to be confronted with daily, and it's just you and how you think, and that is where it comes to play.
Well, indeed, exercising judgment. Miss Mort?
Yeah. I've given too many examples today. I don't want to add another one.
Oh, no, I mean,
But
the more
think-
examples, the more we understand the picture.
Listening to her.
You sir?
If I could take the example part, if she doesn't mind.
Okay, sure. So then you can give the example, and then she does the
I-
talking.
Okay,
do you want to do it now? Okay, sure.
Okay, so a personal example. I remember before I left to secondary school, anytime I ate, like my mom gave me dinner, I would eat and then leave the bowl. Like I don't even bother picking it up. And then she'll come and be like, she's on my case. Why won't you just, the least you can do is just pick it up and take it to the kitchen.
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm like, oh, this woman again, you're disturbing me. Okay, it was something I did, and I the more she talked about it, the more I did it. Until I left for secondary school. Now, the thing about education, if you are doing this, until I left for secondary school. Now, the thing about education, it's not just about what you learn within the four walls. It changes the way you see things.
Yeah.
And the way you behave entirely. So, when I went to school, and Tamale Senior High, that is. And if you know Tamale Senior High, per their dining hall, schedule, Mondays is jollof and egg. And in fact, people could kill for that egg.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You don't get it every day.
You find people struggling at the walls, at the
The
dining halls,
table,
just
yeah.
so they could make it. Now, if you were 10 or 5 minutes late, forget about it.
It's done.
Yes.
It's done.
So, I had to come up with a plan. I mean, how do I leave class and also make it to the dining hall just enough to be able to get my
your
jollof and egg? So I came up with a simple plan. And you know what the plan was?
No.
Once you are done eating, just wash the plates. I mean, just, put it in a clean state. Once you come, all you have to do is rinse it and then you are off. And this is something this woman had been trying to teach me all along at home. So after I kept doing this for some time at school, I went back home and unconsciously one night she served me food I ate, and then I not only picked it up to the kitchen, she saw me, in the sink, doing all kinds of stuff. I'm like, "Ish." I didn't even realize it until she was like, "What happened to you
What
in
has
school?"
happened? Ah!
Yeah.
Some change has happened.
Yeah.
But it's good. I mean, it changed your mindset, how you thought and how you saw things. And you actually understood her perspective
Yes.
now. Mariapa.
Yeah. I was going to give an example, right? So, I've learned from my personal experiences and experiences of others that you cannot count on people.
Yeah.
There are some people you can count on. So I've learned that there's some people you can count on and some people you cannot count on. And
Yeah.
that in this world, nobody owes you anything.
Yeah.
I came to that conclusion because of the things that I have seen and the things that have happened to me. So just like Hafiz said, lifelong learning takes you outside of the classroom. You have to learn from your experiences. And to be able to learn from your experiences, you have to take note. It's like you cannot, sometimes things happen to you and you just forget about it.
Yeah.
But sometimes things happen to you to teach you lessons.
That's true.
And so as humans, we should be very sharp and to take note of sometimes things happen and then you should know Like she said, you should ask yourself, what is this trying to teach
me, yeah.
What can I learn from
That's
this?
true.
Why did I go through this?
Yeah.
So to be able to open ourselves up to lifelong learning, we should be very sharp and be able to take notes in the experiences that we face day in, day out in our interactions with people.
She nailed it right on the head. Barry.
Yeah, I think very important points. One of the important points that she made was, change being very constant. No matter how you look at it, it's definitely something that is very, very constant, in the sense that she made mention of COVID-19 and how corporate companies actually resorted to virtual, ways of dealing with their clients and everything. So in this regard, that's where, I mean, just as she said, what are you trying? What is this particular situation trying to teach you? What are you learning from it, and how do you plan to go by it? Because when you learn something from it, obviously you would be forced to execute it and implement it. So these are some of the things that she made mention that I felt like, yeah, obviously, because COVID is here now. We need different ways to do things. What are these things? We've learned it. Let's implement it differently. So yeah, that's very
true.
important. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We've learnt it. Let's implement it. And let's take the final part of what she had to say.
Now, let's look at how could collective life learning be transformational for our dear motherland Africa.
Yes, our dear motherland, Africa. One of the things I am so passionate about is the recognition that this continent has so much untapped potential.
No doubt.
And I think lifelong learning can help us to tap into this potential by, for instance, one, learning from our mistakes. The listeners who are students of history will just see constant mistakes we keep making over and over again. And why aren't we learning from them? So I think that's how lifelong learning can help us.
Right.
The other way is, I find us Africans, we self-sabotage because we don't believe in ourselves. We get in our own way. Many times it's not the West, it's not others, it's us not doing ourselves justice. But when you do the inner work as Africans individually and then collectively, when we start to do the inner work, we can start to believe in ourselves and what we have to offer. And ultimately, if we're constantly learning about ourselves, how to be better, particularly the leaders, you can imagine I have to go back to this leadership thing.
Right.
If our leaders are constant learners, then we would get the leadership we deserve to transform this continent.
Ine ndi wa ku Africa ndipo ndimanyadira kwambiri ndizosangalatsa.
Well, she's made quite salient points, like serious salient points. And one thing that actually hit my head is the fact that sometimes we sabotage ourselves. And sometimes, the things we have to learn from our mistakes as a continent, as a people. And with even this sabotaging thing, I just thought of the AFCFT, the African Free Continental Trade Agreement, where you had some African countries agreeing to certain things and not agreeing to other things. The overall goal of this is to bring about development on the continent. But you have certain countries that start to think of, what am I gaining as a country on my own? Individually. And when they see that, okay, fine, it's going to be for a collective good, but individually they may not be gaining much, then they have to start putting in some blocks on certain places. Now, if we keep on this part with such a mindset, how are we going to chalk down development for the whole continent? I mean, that basically is my whole thought. That was one thing I actually picked mainly from it. Hafiz.
Yes, she said a whole lot. Not so much I can add there. I mean, she's covered the ground very well in there. But as far as Africa goes, I think, like she put it, we tend to get in our own way. We are our own enemies, basically, where we tend to, get in between things. Now, if you even take, for instance, where, I mean, it's far easier to travel to Europe, certain parts of Europe, than it is to travel among sister African states.
Yeah.
And we are in 2021. How do you explain that? And so, I mean, she's covered everything in there. But just to wrap it up on lifelong learning, I think one basic element of lifelong learning is simple: curiosity.
Yeah.
I think that's where it starts, the basics. Because you see, curiosity by nature is something that demonstrates interest with humility. It is something that cannot be prescribed, and it is inherently optimistic. I don't know if I made sense.
No, you did
Anyway,
make sense.
with these
I mean,
three things.
You did make sense.
Yes, because look, just take a look at kids and the way they ask questions, the innocence with which they ask and try to understand certain things. I mean, the journey starts there, even as as a grown folk.
Yeah.
When you actually find yourself asking some of these questions and trying to genuinely learn, I think you are. You've begun your journey there.
That's very important. That desire to actually want to learn, to know, is what should take you there, Barry.
Yeah, very, very important, submissions right there. And why I want to talk about the fact that she made mention of her own enemies. I just wanted to remember a joke one Nigerian comedian says that when the sheep was sailing, it was the black man who was actually punishing the fellow. So it's just something that has been there since Adam. Exactly. But the reality is we tend to not believe what our fellow African man can do, because like, what are you doing? Like, oh, come on. I mean, they boldly tell you. Some actually boldly tell you that, this cannot be compared to what, the Westerners do or what they've created. I mean, what you're doing is of inferior, and all of that. So it kills your spirit inside. That boldness that you carry to actually spend time to do, to come up with this creation. It kills it. Yes, and sometimes we actually come out with certain products and we don't target us. We target the elite and people outside. So it's like you do it sometimes and then you don't focus on your brother African man to benefit. Yeah. You're looking at, I'm looking to export. Exactly, yeah, we want to go international. But let's have that circulation of capital, of human resource right here before we go out there. It's like, no, I'm targeting the international market. When you've not finished targeting the entire Africa.
More like solving the problems around you.
I mean, just like I've mentioned, it's difficult to go to another African country sometimes than traveling abroad.
Yeah.
So we really need to look at ourselves and rethink. I mean, very important. Yeah.
We're not creating conducive environment for growth and development amongst ourselves. Mamiaba, last words.
I just wanted to give an example to what Barry said.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's this app that everybody's talking about now. It's called Clubhouse.
Clubhouse.
I don't know what they do on there or what's it about.
Clubhouse.
But apparently, I don't know if it's Camelonia or Chamelonia. It's Camelonia. He created a similar app. And he didn't get support from the black community.
Oh.
But you look at what's happening now, and it's like the black community is the one that is using the Clubhouse app the most now. So I think we should believe in ourselves. We should support our own. And I think that not believing or not supporting our own comes from some sort of self-envy. It's like, once I am not able to do it, why is he doing it?
Yes.
Why should I support him so he succeeds? And that's something
true.
we should do away with.
That's true. That's very, very true. Well, you've heard it. I promised we'd have a good time, rich content, and we actually have had that here. Now, Busara Africa is passionate about changing the practice of leadership in Africa, and they're committed to working with leaders who want to get the better of what they do. So you heard the voice of Taaka Awori, and she is the founder, the CEO of Busara Africa. If you want to reach them, you can send them an email at t.awori@busaraafrica.com. t.awori@busara-africa.com. I think I should spell that. So the t.awori is AWORI and Busara is BUSARA-africa.com. You can also reach them via phone on +233 2646 88381 +233 2646 88381.